Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar in the series run through the SIMPLE initiative. That's the Safety in Manufacturing Plastics and Composites. This is an initiative run through HSE and involves several trade bodies. We're delighted this afternoon to welcome speakers from HSE, David Butter and Scott Wynne, who will be taking us through a series of slides with an update on how to operate safely and maintain production through COVID-19. As I'm sure most of you are aware, the guidance changes almost daily, and we're due for more changes at the beginning of next week. Just for a few housekeeping, webcams and microphones are off by default. Questions, please type them into the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. If you can't see it, just try moving your mouse and it should pop up and you'll see a Q&A with speech bubbly things above it. If you put your questions in there, and then once we've finished the actual presentation, we'll take those questions in the order that they've come in. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Scott Wynne from HSE, who will be leading on the presentation today.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Scott Wynne. I'm an inspector with the HSE, and I recently joined the general manufacturing sector. And part of that, we work with the plastics industry and obviously composites as well. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, who I think is on the line.
Hi, I'm David Butter, and some of you, if you've joined into these before, will have heard me before. So today we thought we'd give you a bit of variety and let Scott take you through all this.
I don't have a translator available, but if anyone does struggle a bit, please let me know and type a comment, and I'll try and answer as best I can. So hopefully, if this works correctly, we should be able to go through the slides. And it's not moving at the moment. Oh, there we go. So today we're talking really about COVID-19. Obviously, it's a key topic at the moment. And in particular, what we're looking at is the risk assessment phase. We're looking at social distancing and other areas around that, and how we can carry on with work safely, become COVID secure, and also maintain production, as is the title of the webinar. So what we've tried to do is really break this down into the key aspects, really, which is if we come up with three topics. So really safe air, which is if we can work outside, ideal. If we can ensure working in fresh air environment, plenty of air changes and so on, it's great. Safe surfaces, which I think we're all aware of the importance of that right now. So again, keeping common contact areas clean, door handles, grab rails, tables, chairs, keyboards, etc. And safe people, which is again trying to prevent that person-to-person transmission. And one of the key aspects of that really is social distancing. So social distancing, it's a term we hear every day. So what is it about? What's it for? At the moment, as things stand, it's still the most effective means we have of preventing transmission of this virus. It applies to us all, whether we're at home or at work. So how does it apply at work? Much the same, really. We have this 2-metre guideline, which we should try and abide by. Obviously, we accept that there are certain circumstances within a workplace where that 2 metres might not always be possible to maintain. And that's where we need to look at other options, such as screening, as physical separation, and so on. So what sort of things do we need to consider, especially in a working environment? The first one, which I think often gets missed, is actually how staff get to work and how they get home. Is there things like shared transport? Do we have people sharing lifts, people sharing vehicles? Do people walk? Do people cycle? Which is obviously ideal, and so on. How do they clock in? So what happens when they arrive at work? How do they get from being outside to in their workplace, and how do they commence with work? Other areas in work where they have to change clothes, for example, or change into overalls and back at the end of the day. What are the cleaning regimes generally around the workplace? And again, this isn't necessarily just about COVID-19, just generally, but in particular things like disinfection. So what are we doing in addition to what we would normally do to control the risks? And then the final point on the slide is visual reminders, which are so important and are actually probably the easiest way we've got of reminding people of the need to keep socially distant. And what we've got in the next few slides is some examples from workplaces which we've dealt with in the past. We're really grateful to them in that they've allowed us to share some of these images, which I think will give us a real visual representation of what we're seeing in different workplaces as solutions for the social distancing issues. So the first slide we've got here, it's a car park from quite a large factory, and what they've decided to do is, as part of their cohorting arrangements, is to split the car park in two. So we've got an early shift and a late shift, which again, it's quite a simple thing to do. Again, not everyone has the space to do this, but if you do, it's an ideal solution, and it really keeps people apart when they arrive at work and also when they leave work as well. So again, it's just quite a simple measure to try and reduce the amount of contact between different cohorts and different people. And clocking in, which is something I mentioned at the start. Again, this is an example from a business where we can see in the before image, people congregated around the clocking in machine, seeking to start work. And it was a bit disorganised and people were very close together. So what they've done is they've used very visual reminders there with simple crosses on the floor, using tape. You can use hazard tape, you can use plain tape, in something that's really obvious and really visual. And I think that it helps to spread people out and to control the flow of people to and from work as well. Another couple of examples here of corridors and how people can move around the workplace. So the image on the left, being quite a simple one, using hazard marker tape at 2 metre intervals. And again, something that's very obvious, very visual, and it's very easy for people to follow. And on the right, we've got a two-way walkway. So again, directional arrows there, but similar idea with the marking tape on the floor, just to indicate that 2 metre distance. And this is an image, this one's actually in an outdoor area or an external area, but again, exactly the same principles here. It's something very visual, very simple, very easy to implement, but something which is really effective in keeping people at 2 metre distance apart. And anyone who's been in a supermarket or any sort of retail premise in the last weeks will be familiar with this sort of thing as well. One of the key areas we've looked at, and we will be doing more work on this, is the common areas of businesses. So things like canteens, clocking in areas, as we've mentioned, car parks and break areas. And this is an example from a business where, as you can see in the image at the top before, it's quite a densely populated canteen area. So with a few changes, with a few movements of furniture, and with different markings with tape, designate the appropriate seating positions. What they've achieved there is an adequate social distance between people of at least 2 metres. And here we can see the photograph of that particular arrangement. So again, you can see warning signs have been placed in certain areas and on certain seats. Again, very visual, very easy, and it keeps it in mind as well that it's important to maintain that distance. And the one thing that sometimes gets missed is the smoking areas, or vaping areas, whichever is the chosen method. So again, a very simple solution here was just to mark out small boxes. You can use a grid system, as long as it's very obvious and as long as the distances are right. It's whatever works for you, really. Another area which we see issues in is the office environment. So with this one, we can see that they've arranged their desks. So they've got banks of desks. What they've actually done is restricted the use of the desks. So in essence, they're using half the amount of desks. But what they can do with that is using those visual markers with the green and red flags. They can restrict the distance between people or extend the distance between people to ensure that social distance. And on the left, you can see one of their meeting rooms. So they've used hazard warning tape on the floor to indicate seating positions. And what they've done is, I think the wording's probably wrong in here, meeting room size is reduced. They've actually reduced the number of people who can be present at any one time. And as with today with the webinar, as with many of you who I'm sure are working remotely or are able to work remotely as well, having people dial in from external again, reduces the number of people present and reduces that risk. This is an example from a production environment. So we had a production line here with quality assurance areas off to the sides. And what this business decided to do was actually extend their line by 3 meters. And by doing that, they've been able to maintain the production whilst also being able to ensure that social distance. And by staggering the positions of people on the line, again, that means that you're not stood directly opposite someone and you can maintain that 2 meter distance. Similarly, I think the quality assurance areas have also been moved slightly further away from the production line. So again, it allows a bit more room for people to move freely without impeding on the 2 meters. And this is a photograph of another production environment, again, another production line. And what they've used here is they've used plastic sheeting within a framework. So again, where you can't maintain that 2 meter distance, and it won't always be possible, then we can use other measures to mitigate that, such as here it's plastic sheeting. You can use perspex screens or anything that's solid and that can be easily disinfected or cleaned is adequate. But again, that's very much where we can't maintain this 2 meter distance. And that's it for the examples. So just a couple of other areas to cover really. So RIDDOR, one of the questions we have been asked is, do I have to report COVID infections? What we'd say here is that if there's reasonable evidence that someone's been diagnosed and it was likely to be exposed because of their work, and if this isn't at work, this is because of their work, then it must be reported as exposure to a biological agent. So this, generally speaking, will be people who are working in, for example, a care environment or a healthcare environment where their work directly brings them in contact with people who may already have the virus and who may already be transmitting the virus. It's unlikely in most work settings that this will be the case, but again, it's just something to be aware of. And one of the other areas which we get a lot of questions on is PPE. So as the situation stands at the moment, it hasn't changed. There are no changes to any expectations for PPE. Again, there is government guidance and there's Public Health England who have produced their own advice and guidance. As for us, hierarchy of control, the personal measures are always at the bottom of the pyramid or at the bottom of the list. And very much that those collaborative or collective control measures are at the top. So again, things like social distancing, it's something that can be applied across a workplace. With PPE, it's only protecting one person. So again, nothing's changed in that sense. Good hygiene, regular hand washing, keeping social distance, trying to avoid touching the face, and other simple measures are the most effective that we have at the moment. There are obviously some procedures or some processes which require specific PPE. Again, that's controlling exposure to another medium or another agent. So that's separate from the COVID issue. So again, we would still expect our PPE to be worn where there is need, but for control of the risk with COVID, we wouldn't necessarily expect it. And then some of the guidance. So these were updated this week. In fact, it was updated yesterday. So these are the latest links on the HSE website. Again, I think these slides will be circulated at the end of today. So again, there are links there directly to the HSE landing page, to the Working Safely guidance, and then also to the .gov website, which is, again, at the moment, it's regularly updated, if not weekly, sometimes daily. So it's always worth checking back to make sure it's the latest guidance. And just a couple of other screenshots. So this is the HSE landing page. Again, if you go to hse.gov.uk, there's a very obvious link within that to the COVID site. And again, this is what you'll see when you land there. There's also guidance on there and specific information for some of the devolved administrations as well. So you'll see there is a link to the Scottish Government website, to the Welsh Government website, and also Northern Ireland as well. And again, latest information and advice on there. So I know that recently it's been updated with some of the advice on air conditioning, ventilation, and there are other specific tasks there, which specific topics, should I say, which you can click through. And again, there's a wealth of guidance on there. And these are two of the documents which HSE has produced. So again, Working Safely During Coronavirus Outbreak, short guide. talking with your workers about preventing coronavirus. So these are both available through the website. And I think that there's sort of two aspects to this. So the first one is, what can we do as a business to ensure that we're working as safely as possible, or becoming COVID secure, as it seems to be the common phrase now. And the second one is about talking with your workers. So again, how do we allay fears? How do we reassure people that what we're doing is right, and that actually the risks are mitigated or reduced as far as we possibly can? And the final slide, so this is some of the .gov guidance, and I think David actually had a hand in the guidance on the left, so he might want to talk a little bit about that. But on the right is basically the certificate of self-certification, say that we've taken everything into consideration, we've conducted a risk assessment, and we've done everything that we reasonably can to reduce the risks. And I think displaying that somewhere in the workplace, signed by, for example, a senior director, it gives some reassurance to workers and even people visiting the business that actually you've done what you can to make sure that you're doing all to control the risks associated with COVID-19. And I don't think there's anything further from me at this point. So if I could possibly hand back to Sue.
Yep, I think. Yes, I do have. I do have control. Okay. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? There aren't any actually in the question and answer section at the moment, so you must have done a very good job there in explaining everything.
It was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I mean, I can't reiterate enough, there is tons of information on our website, on the .gov website, and also Public Health England as well. So there is an awful lot, sometimes a bit too much information, but there is a lot out there as well. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I know that both, you saw very briefly the Composites, a screenshot of the Composites UK guidance, and there's also a BPF guidance available on their website, which is tailored more towards our specific sectors. We've taken the guidance that's available from Gov websites and also the HSE websites and distilled what is relevant to our particular sectors. So it's worth checking those out as well. I know that ours will be updated next week once the new distancing guidance comes out. I don't know if you've got anything you want to say about that, Scott, about the switch to kind of 1 metre.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think our position would certainly be that we still expect there to be a 2 metre distance between people. Where possible. Again, if it's not possible, some of the physical controls we discussed just before in the slides. I think the 1 metre relaxation, should we call it, is firmly directed towards the hospitality industry, because for various reasons they can't operate in an economically viable way without that.
Sure.
But I think, generally speaking, to be fair, we've found this with speaking to people in the industry as well, in various industries, that actually, 2 metres sounds about right. We're going to stick with it. Why would you reduce that distance? Why would you increase the risk if you can work around it? So I think from our perspective, we're still expecting 2 metres where possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly that's the feedback that we've had from our members, that the 2 metre guidance is actually working really well for them. They're all set up now and production is going ahead. Okay, we've had a few questions come in. Government have reiterated that they fully expect businesses to publish their risk assessments. HSE have stated that they will not enforce this policy. Is that still the case?
Yeah, yes, it is. I mean, the only legal duty that you have as an employer is that if you've obviously got more than 5 employees, you write your risk assessment down, but we would expect you to obviously publicise that to your employees and your staff. We're not expecting companies to publish it on their website. There may well be good reasons for it, that it may well contain some process secrets and things that you don't necessarily want publishing. But on the other hand, I've seen some 70 and 80 page documents from multinational companies who have decided to publish everything. They basically published a brochure which deals with supply chain issues, what they will do in the case of an outbreak, how they've adopted the manufacturing facility, etc. And it's really it's up to you. Some people have found it useful for confidence of the employees and customers to say, look, look, we're really good. We've done all these things, and it has a benefit. There is no legal requirement. The only requirement is, say, in terms of the law that we are able to enforce. And bear in mind, we have no additional powers due to the pandemic. We're still using the powers we have under HSW, Health and Safety Work Act, and that's with you've got 5 or more employees, you need to make a written record. But what's key for us is that you've actually communicated those controls and expectations to your employees, to your contractors, to your visitors, and to any sort of delivery drivers, etc. And that's the key thing for us. And that's what we would look at.
That's great, thank you. Another question, and we did touch on this slightly because you've mentioned that the aircon and ventilation guidance has been updated. And the question is really around how to ensure workers' safety when using centralised air conditioning.
Yeah, it was an area that we looked at because obviously it was raised as a concern. At the moment, what we believe is the risk of air conditioning actually spreading coronavirus is extremely low. So you can continue to use most types of air conditioning systems as normal. But what you might want to look at is if you're using a centralized ventilation system that removes and circulates air to different rooms, that you might want to turn the recirculation function off, and just so, a bit like in your car, so you just then bring in fresh air. And I think in most cars you've got a little button that says recirculate or fresh, and you can, automatic. I think if you've got that sort of system, that your ventilation system is better to bring fresh air in, deal with it, and then push the air out, so you're getting air changes rather than just circulating the air, which potentially you could then start to see a build-up bin. But it's the same with desk fans, and again, the thing that we say is get good ventilation in the workplace and a good supply of fresh air. So if your air conditioning will pull in fresh air, let it pull in the fresh air and operate it as normal.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Question around whether HSE are going to be conducting COVID-19 inspections, and what are you going to be looking for?
We are. There are a number of ways that we're doing it. Some will be by telephone. As a business, if you're open, you may get a telephone and you'll be asked a series of questions. Depending on the answers, you may get another telephone call and somebody will ask for some more detail around those questions. And as a result of that, if it's believed that's not quite right, then you may well get somebody phoning up and say, look, I'm coming to have a look at what you're doing. Basically, what we would look at would be the control measures that you've implemented. And again, that's what we're looking at is making sure that the work activity does not increase the risk of transmission. And that's the key thing in all of this. I have to say, on those visits that we've done so far, and when we look back on the concerns that have been raised with us, I think about out of 2,000 or so contacts that we've had, I think it's very few that we've actually had to take any sort of enforcement beyond verbal advice. Obviously, we will check to make sure that you act on the verbal advice, but it's very rare that we've had to give people written advice, and obviously in the form of a letter or an improvement notice. I think where we have been, if you like, feet on the ground, looking at COVID controls, where we have had to take formal enforcement action, generally it's been on traditional health and safety issues. The guard, still haven't put the guard back on the machine that they're using. What we have found is that businesses generally have taken it seriously and have done the best. And again, that's the key throughout this. If you've implemented the 2 meters, you've done the marking, you've got your cleaning regimes, you've put everything in place, and you've done all that you can, and we turn up, we go, look, yep, you've done all that you can. Where we will start probably to probe a little bit more is if you sort of stray away from the 2 meters. So if you're saying, oh, now that they're working 1.5 meters, we'll say, well, why? Why, why can you only do it this way? And then what are those other mitigations in? So that's kind of where the probing will be. And the other thing I think we'll also be taking a greater look at is those sort of common areas, how are those controls working out, because where we think pretty much most industries, when we've gone and looked in the production areas, they've pretty much got that sorted. Where things can lapse is in the supervision and management of break rooms, the smoking area, they're getting people in. And again, at certain times of day at shift changeover, you've got a huge risk there of, if you like, community transmission from one shift to another shift. So it's probably those we will probably be asking the questions about. Production areas, and I'm just sort of touching wood here, up to now, people have organised themselves and thought about it, and they've probably got supervision on the shop floor. What they may not have is a supervision at the smoking shelter to make sure 10 people, because it's raining and a bit windy and a bit cold, don't all cram in and huddle up together, because it's kind of undoing all of those other controls that have been put about. And the other thing is also thinking about, again, it's looking at those noisy environments where you look on the surface and everything's fine, but then, you know, you'll notice the supervisor's going over and leaning and talking in the air very closely to an individual, you know, rather than using a whiteboard as a means of communication, or actually going off the shop floor to a quieter area where they can stand 2 meters apart and have that discussion. And I think sometimes, you know, they may see a, you know, a quality issue or something, or what's going on, and a bit like, you know, we used to see usually in noisy areas when someone then just lifts the hearing protection off the rear to hear what's saying, completely undoing all these things. So it's those are the sorts of things that we'd be looking at and saying, right, how do you make sure, how do you, you know, how do you, we can see the physical controls that you put in, how do you ensure that those standards are maintained and supervised, and in particular those common areas, you know, toilets, break areas, getting in, all those sorts of things. So that's pretty much what we would look at.
Okay, that's great, thank you. So if an employee is tested positive, the company's got 2 meter distancing in place, would you expect the colleagues of that employee then to have to self-isolate if they're not showing any symptoms?
No, we wouldn't. And I think if you go on the PHE or PHW or the other 12 administrations, they will define what's meant by a contact. And a contact, I think I've lost the link now, but if you look at those, if you are not 2 meters, but you have something like a physical separation between, that is not classed as a close contact. So therefore, if those members of staff are not displaying symptoms and have not been in close contact, i.e. outside the workplace, then they will continue to come in. And that's a key thing, thinking about not only looking at reducing transmission by maintaining your standards throughout the workplace and getting people in, as Scott went through on, you know, thinking about how people actually get to the workplace. What you're also doing, you're also, you know, you may look at your cohorts, your work bubbles, your shift bubbles, whatever you want to call them, but also you're doing a bit of business continuity planning, that if the worst does happen, it has the minimum effect, so that if one person goes down, the whole shift doesn't go down or the whole line doesn't go down, because you've put these mitigations in place. And the other key thing I will say to you now is making sure that part of your communications to staff is that they feel comfortable and supported to tell you that they're ill. Because what you don't want to happen is somebody who maybe have very mild symptoms thinking, you know what, I don't want to be off work for a fortnight because it might not get me overtime, might got this, might got that, and then coming in and then, you know, at a point where they're shedding the virus and then causing issues. So you need to have those honest conversations with staff to encourage them to report, but your mitigations will help the business in that if one person goes down, so that's the only person that goes down, they self-isolate for 2 weeks, and hopefully if there's no complications, etc., they can then come back into the workplace. But you know, that's why we the 2 meters is vitally important. If you've maintained that, that's not defined as a close contact, those members of staff will still be able to come into work.
Okay, that's brilliant. I suppose that links to the next question, is about trying to leave people working remotely for as long as possible.
Yeah, I mean that's it. I mean, it's we've seen all sorts of sort of changes to the way business operates. I mean, some of you know, if you've got earlies and afters, perhaps the earlies will be making one half the product, and then the afters will finish it off, and where usually the process would be going on all the time. but they wouldn't be able to do that because there's not enough room. So business are reorganized. They've limited the number of products. If you you can think about those fast food chains that are currently open that you can drive through or whatever, they've limited the menu. They're limited that because they can't produce the other product whilst maintaining social distancing. There just isn't room in the kitchen, etc., to do those sort of more complicated things. And again, for those staff that can work from home, obviously, if you're a welder or there are certain jobs you can't do from home, therefore put the things in place. But where people can work remotely and can work from home, again, the advice still is to do that, and that will remain. So again, as part of your risk assessment, who actually needs to be turning up at the plant gate at the start of the day? And can some of those things be done remotely? And if they can, continue to do so. But again, then obviously, again, look at our guidance, certainly on DSE stuff and everything else. We're slightly changing some nuancing there when home working becomes more than temporary. Again, getting support for that. But again, also think about with that remote working, you may want to do rotas that come in 1 day a week or something like that, just to maintain some contact. But again, think about, they may need some controls out with of COVID transmission prevention, but other things. So don't forget about the people that you don't see on a day-to-day basis. But keep the minimum number that you need at the plant to keep it running, and those that don't need to be there, if they're away, again, you're reducing that risk of transmission.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. There's a question around the blue certificate that you've got on the screen in front of you, about whether it's obligatory to display this at work.
No, it's not. And again, but it's just, it may be something that will be useful for your customers to see, your contractors to see, or your delivery drivers, whoever it is, to say, look, we've taken it. It's just, if you don't have to publish your risk assessment on the website, you don't have to display that, but it may be something you want to consider doing just to alleviate any anxieties on your staff. A bit like restaurants, I think they have the 1 to 5, don't they, on the scale that the local authority gives them the sticker to put on. Similar sort of thing. It's just another way of saying to people, you can be confident to come into our workplace because we've done all these things. So I can't see why it would be an issue for someone to say, well, we're not doing that. So you're saying you haven't done all these things, because we will expect you to have done all those things if we come knocking on the door. And it's just a way of, if you like, the company just a sort of a small public display on your front door or at your gate, whatever, say, look, we have taken this seriously. We've gone through all these things, and we believe we've done all that we can. It's just a way of improving confidence, really, raising confidence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A final question, unless there's any others that come in. So there was a photo that you showed where it's difficult to maintain the 2-meter distancing, and we're using screens to help with that, to mitigate the risk of transmission. So is there a minimum height for the screens between the operators?
Not really. You've got to look at the size of your workforce, and I've looked along a lot of production lines in my time, and if you look at the 90th percentile of the size of people, they're tall and short. So you got to look at your size of your workforce and what they're doing and what posture they may have doing that. So if they're sitting down, and that's then obviously you're not going to need things as tall as if you're actually doing the work standing up, and you've got a variation in size of staff. It's just really being sensible about it. You don't have it so that someone can peer over the side and talk to the neighbour. A bit like, if you think back to sort of partitions on desks, when you're sitting down, you're fine, but as soon as you stand up, you can lean across and hang on, that's all, and all things then disappear. So I think, again, it's part of your risk assessment, look at what is, what's going to control the risk of transmission. And that control measure, so that will tell you, right, okay, if people can stand up quite regularly, we need to do it at least, I don't know, 6'6", for example. Unless, of course, you've got 7 feet, or people walking on stilts or something like that on, around the process, then you'd have to accommodate those. I think it's just being sensible, to be honest.
Okay, that's great.
On that, sorry, I think the sort of key aspect of the using the screens as where you can't achieve that 2 meters as well. It's that face-to-face contact that's really important, because that's what we're trying to avoid. So, you know, the fact that people's feet may be within 2 meters, that's not known really as a, you know, significant route of transmission. It's that face-to-face aspect. So again, we've seen some solutions in industries where they might have a table between workers, but then a screen on top of it, as an example. So again, it's that sort of very much it's eye-level contact rather than, you know, sort of incidental contact around that as well.
Sure, sure. Okay, well, we've not had any other questions come in. If after the webinar you think of a burning question that you wish you'd asked, please get in touch with either BPF or Composites UK, and we'll pass that question on to HSE for them to get back to you with it. There was a question came up in the chat. You will be all sent a link to the recording of the webinar, and also you'll get a copy of the slide set as well, so that you can refer back to those. But I'd like to thank both David and Scott for a very interesting webinar again. No doubt if things, and as things change, then we'll be looking to update you guys through further guidance on the website, communications, and also webinars. But thank you very much, David and Scott, and we'll see you all soon. Stay safe.